So if you're a developer, if you're a user, you're a validator, and you know how PLL works, you have an asymmetric opportunity to earn more and do better.
Okay, perfect. We are live. So hi, everyone. Today we have on Cami. Cami is, I think I met Cami like when Cami was also one of the first people which I connected with in the crypto space, actually. I remember your Build Space article way back. So I remember that time where you had written like an article about getting started in crypto. I think this was like 3 years ago. So we've come a very long way from that. And I'm very excited to have you on today. So you're now doing DevRel at Bearchain. So why don't I pass it on to you for like a quick intro, and then we can get into all the details.
Okay, cool. Well, first, thanks for having me on, guys. I've watched a few of the episodes and I'm like, I need to be on there one day. So thank you. Yeah, quick intro. I go by Cami. I lead developer evangelism at Berachain right now. Previously, I was at Fuel. I also was at the Graph before that. I took some time after Fuel and I did a bunch of independent stuff. I worked with a bunch of different teams. And, eventually I was ready to join a team full time. And I had been following Berachain for a while. I'd been following Smokey, and I kind of just knew them as like a good marketing L1. Like I knew they had good memes and I knew they had a good idea of how to reach people. And that was kind of like my surface level understanding. And once I started chatting with the team, and like I knew Manny from their team from before, once I started chatting with him, I learned about POL. And for me, it was really like this aha moment of, wow, with POL and the tokenomics of Berachain, you really open up. Instead of playing like 2D chess where you can play everywhere else, you can play 3D chess. And there's just like another dimension of meta games that you can play that aren't really possible on other L1s or L2s. So that's what got me really excited. And it's kind of, I think, maybe a surprising move even for myself, because I think Bearchain is very DeFi native and very like DeFi centric. And I don't think I would have described myself as a DeFi person before. I came from, similar to you guys, like a much more engineering oriented background where I wasn't doing like yield farming and strategies for maximizing yield and like using all the new weird DeFi things and like all this. I never really did any of that. And that's the impression that I had of Bearchain. And a lot of people who are on Bearchain do kind of have that background. So for me, it's really been, I've learned a lot about DeFi and had to spend a lot of time kind of like covering those bases. But I think it's actually really good because I have a completely different network and audience than the kind of DeFi centric people. So yeah.
And okay, so and my questions are more, or my first question is more about the context you have on the space. You said developer evangelist versus DevRel, but you were maybe even like a Web 2 DevRel before getting into the space. So I think my question is actually, how are they different between Web 2 and Web 3? But you have so much context into this space. I think this will lead to other questions about DevRel and about Web 3 DevRel. But just like on the surface, how are Web 2 and Web 3 DevRel different?
I would say the biggest difference is that also, like, I had very limited experience in Web 2 as a DevRel. Like I only did it for a very short amount of time before moving over to crypto. So maybe this isn't like the most complete view of the world, but in the short time that I did DevRel and Web 2, I think it was a lot more focused on things that are centered around like maybe technical support-ish vibes, like where it's kind of more like helping developers do their integration and like focusing a lot more on docs and kind of just like traditional things. Whereas I think in crypto, a big part of DevRel is also education and almost like marketing and strategy, because in crypto, it's very likely that you're working on something that's in a new category. Even if you have something that's like an older category like EVM, which is not really a new category, it's pretty reasonable to think that within that category, you might be doing something new. And because of that, there has to be a way bigger push on education, and on education in the traditional sense of like docs and, videos and whatever type of education, but also education in like convincing developers to view the world in a different way. And so, for example, when I was at Fuel, convincing developers that a non-EVM layer 2 was even possible and then was cool was a lot more involved than like the education that you would have done in Web 2 of like, here's how you use this API, or like, here's how you use this database. Like you're not convincing people like to change the way that they think about the world. You're just telling them like, this is how you do the thing. But in crypto, I think a lot of my work is like helping people change the way that they view the world.
That's awesome. Good answer.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. Yeah, I think that really describes like what you do in crypto. You try to change the current views, whereas in Web2 you kind of teach the tools. So I kind of want to ask. Probably many people have heard about Bearchain, but can you like explain like a high level overview what is Bearchain and just kind of like the difference from other L1s?
Totally. So Berachain is an EVM identical L1 turning liquidity into security powered by proof of liquidity. So that sounds like a lot of words, and I'll tell you exactly what it means. So Berachain is an EVM layer 1, and anything that you can do on another EVM layer 1, you can do on Berachain. You can take your existing smart contract, deploy it on Berachain. It works exactly the same. The core of what's different is that Berachain uses proof of liquidity, which the way I explain it is like proof of liquidity is a way to mechanistically and systemically reward players in the ecosystem built in directly into the chain. So if you think about other ecosystems, every ecosystem wants to incentivize and reward people on their ecosystem, whether it be users, protocols, validators. There's ways to incentivize and reward all of them. But for a lot of these, it's kind of external to the chain. It's like a grants program or a governance forum or some sort of retro PGF where some, body of people, they look through applications or, they somehow decide like who's eligible and what they're getting. And what POL does is it builds this directly into the chain in a systemic way so that it's very clearly defined how these rewards are spread and given across the ecosystem. So in POL, the three kind of sets of players are users, developers, and validators. And the idea is, and maybe I'll take a step back for listeners, because when I first got explained this, I was like, oh, fuck, I didn't really like take this into account. I didn't really realize this because I think none of us ever, at least for developers, we never really think about validators or like the cost to secure a chain really. But one issue with a lot of L1s is that it costs more. There's more assets staked to secure the network than there are assets to secure. So it's like if you're a chain and you have, I'm just going to make something up, I don't know, $5 billion staked, right? And the idea for listeners, right? The idea is that like you have these assets staked and they're there to secure the network. If validators act poorly and not in favor of the network, these assets are slashed and they lose that. And so they're economically incentivized to do the right thing. So let's say you have $5 billion in assets securing this network, but you only have a TVL of like 1 billion or 2 billion. Then it's like there's more, there's like this weird imbalance where there's more securing the network than you're actually securing. There's only $1 billion to secure. Why are we securing it with $5 billion? And so there's this weird kind of like misalignment in a lot of ecosystems. And there's a lot of ecosystems that also have liquidity that is not really put to work. So if you think about like literally anything that's launched in the last year, just as an example, but you can go back as far as you want, where they open up deposits or they open up like a bridge. And what does everyone do? They like go in and lock their liquidity or they go and bridge their assets. What's the main reason that they do it? Like hoping for an airdrop is probably the most real answer, right? And so a lot of these assets, what are they actually doing? Like a very small percentage are maybe being rented out for economic security, are maybe being used, but the vast majority are just sitting in a box. And why do they sit in a box? Because then they can take these funds and say, look, we're getting traction, we're getting like all of these deposits. Like this is, it's kind of like a way to show that you're doing something interesting and good, but they're not actually being used for anything. So a lot of this capital is just like locked up and unproductive. So the premise of POL is take your liquidity and put it in the ecosystem and actually make it productive. And because it's actually being productive, you're getting rewarded on an ongoing and systemic basis from the work that your capital is doing. So let me just give you like an example. I'll walk through what this kind of looks like. So on Bearchain, we have these things called gauges or rewards vaults. And these are venues that are whitelisted for receiving BGT. So if we look right now on B2 Testnet, there's 3 that are listed. The 3 native dApps, BEX, which is the native DEX, BEN, which is the native lending protocol, and BERPs, which is the perps. Yeah. And so you can go to any of these and provide liquidity. So let's say you go into BEX and you can LP, right, provide liquidity into a specific pool. And in return, you get an LP token that says you provided, liquidity into this specific pool, and then you deposit or stake that LP token, and then you start earning BGT. And then that kicks off this flywheel where now you as a user, you're accruing BGT, which then can be delegated to a validator and you can earn more BGT. And maybe we can get into that later, but the premise of it is kind of just like make your liquidity productive, unlike in other ecosystems. And instead of getting like a one-time maybe airdrop or reward, you're getting like ongoing new revenue streams. And not just because Berachain is cool, but because your money is actually working, like it's generating economic activity in the ecosystem.
So, okay, so we've got a couple things to cover here. I feel like we need to rewind and talk about some tech, specifically like to do a swap before Uniswap existed, you had to go to an order book, and it was like a signature-based system with a centralized order book. And then we got DEXs, and DEXs are awesome because they allow us to swap using fully decentralized technology, no centralized point of failure. But the problem is the way the DEX works is it has reserves on both sides. And if you're providing liquidity, you're providing those reserves and you're earning a fee on them. But because of impermanent loss, you're always getting the weaker asset on the trade. And so if one of them goes to the moon and the other one doesn't, you're left with all of the other one. So there's this huge problem of impermanent loss whenever you're doing liquidity providing. So the way they combat this back in the day to what kicked off DeFi Summer was basically a liquidity program where there's another token that's not the main ETH token or the main L1 token, but it's like a new token that gets dripped to liquidity providers to add an extra incentive for them to provide the liquidity because they, they're dealing with impermanent loss. And that goes for a while and that worked. But what you're saying is we build it into our L1 and we provide those the liquidity providers with the extra bonuses in our direct L1 token. Am I saying all of that right so far?
Correct. So the only nuance is that Berachain will have two tokens, Bera, which would be the gas token, and BGT, which is the governance token. And BGT is what LPs will earn, but only for specific pools, right? So this won't be for all pools.
This and now maybe whitelisted pools.
Exactly, whitelisted pools. And now maybe the next logical question is like, well, where does this BGT come from? Like how much is coming and where does it come from and like why? So it comes from, in POL, validators have the power to direct their earned BGT emissions to any gauge. These are called gauges. I don't like this word because it's
a vault.
It's a weird word.
Vault is a better way to say
it. I keep gauge so that people, when they see it in the docs, they remember what I'm saying. But like, I don't like that word. Let's just say it's a vault. Okay. What was I saying? Oh yeah. So where does this come from? So I'm a validator. I go round robin style. And when it's my turn to build a block, I earn some BGT from building that block. And now every validator in Berachain and POL has what they call a Berachef, which is a per validator breakdown of where they're directing their BGT emissions. So if you look on an example now on V2, you literally see like a pie chart where it shows like, this part is blue, this part is green, this part is pink. And it shows you like the breakdown of where they're pushing these emissions to. And these emissions are these vaults, are these gauges. So me as a validator, I can say, I want to push my emissions, like 75% of my emissions to the, Cami ETH pool because I'm already an LP there maybe. So I want to push more BGT emissions to something that I'm receiving BGT emissions from. And so all these validators will have different kind of meta games and ways to align their own incentives to decide where they want to push emissions. But that's where the BGT emissions are coming from validators who say, I want to push emissions here. And if, let's say, out of 100 validators, 90 validators are pushing emissions to this one pool, then there's going to be more BGT rewards that go to that pool.
Got it. Okay, so we've got multiple tokens here. There's the gas token, is it just called Bera token? Yeah. And then there's BGT, which is like a governance token that is dripped to liquidity providers and validators for doing good on the network. Okay, my last piece that I'm confused about, when I hear proof of liquidity, I think about FTX and I think about them over leveraging and taking money and using it somewhere else because it was all centralized. It wasn't really crypto. Like they were using crypto, but they were doing it in databases. They weren't doing it really on chain that much. When they got trashed, like the on chain stuff was the first stuff to get liquidated and get cleaned up because that's the stuff that like isn't soft. That's the hardest part, and you got to get that. So when I heard proof of liquidity, I thought it was some sort of mechanism that proves that you have the liquidity in the place, so it can't be leveraged somewhere else or something like that. But I don't think that's exactly what this is. This is more like rewards for the folks that provide liquidity that comes from this kind of BGT kind of native governance token. So is there anything there in terms of like proving that the liquidity exists, or basically it's on a public blockchain and everyone can see it, so the liquidity exists?
I think what you're referring to, or what I remember it being referred to at the time, was like proof of reserves, like proving
That's
that
what
you
it
have,
is. Yes, yes, yes. That's
so
what I
yeah,
was thinking. Is proof of
not
reserve. It's
related.
different. Yeah.
Yeah, not related. I think proof of liquidity, like, I wasn't around when they coined this term, but just kind of like my own intuition around this term, I think it's like the only way you can earn BGT, you can't buy it and you can't transfer it. You can't do anything. You can only earn it, or you can one-way burn it for Bera, is by providing liquidity. So I think BGT is almost like a reputation system where if you have BGT and the amount of BGT that you have is reflective of your actions of providing liquidity into Bearchain.
You earned it, and you can't go buy it anywhere. You can burn it to Bera, and Bera you can go buy, and there's a liquid market for that. But there is no liquid market for BGT on purpose, because you want it to be one directional and something that you earn. Cool.
Exactly.
Okay.
So
yeah, I think that's all mine so far. Sorry.
I jumped in just at the right time. So, okay. So basically Berachain uses a new consensus mechanism called Proof of Liquidity, where you have the Bera and the BGT. And I like the way you put BGT, like more like a reputation system. What about the honey token, right? Like there's also a honey token, or am I mistaken? Is it used for something else?
You're right. Honey is a stable coin.
Okay. So that's the 3 token mechanism, because I read a lot about the 3 token mechanism, but I didn't exactly know how that fit in. Okay, so I think this makes it a bit more clear, especially for for me. So I'm kind of curious more around the beacon kit, which I believe is the way you can build on Berachain. But can you talk about like how, like, I'm a developer, I'm interested, like what do I do? What is the beacon kit? Where do I go?
So Beacon Kit is actually kind of a separate thing. It's something that you could or would use to spin up your own layer 1 or layer 2. So it's not exactly something that as a developer you would use to build on Bearchain, but rather some open source software that our team built that you can use to spin up your own blockchain using this kind of like architecture that Bearchain has of a separate consensus and execution layer. So Berachain as the L1 uses Beacon Kit. And the way I kind of described it, and we have a Twitter space actually that we recorded last week with Dev, in case any listeners here want to go check it out. It's on the main Berachain Twitter. You'll be able to find it and listen to the recording. But it's kind of like an OP stack or an Arbitrum orbit framework. So it's like something that you can use to spin up a chain. But if you want to kind of chat about like what it means and what it looks like to build on Berachain itself, like I said, because it's EVM identical, you can use any of the existing tooling and stack that you would already use. Yeah, so like everything works exactly the same. It supports all the same opcodes. You can use all the different execution clients. And yeah, any developer can bring their smart contract, deploy it. And I would say the thing that's different, or the thing that you have to keep in mind, really is more at the like kind of a meta level, kind of a technical level of like how to use POL and how to like actually tap into it. And we were just talking about this yesterday, where it's like with POL, there's a really big opportunity because there's like an information asymmetry right now. Not that many people know how POL works. So if you're a developer, if you're a user, you're a validator, and you know how POL works, you have an asymmetric opportunity to earn more and do better. And, over time, the information asymmetry kind of normalizes, and then more people will start to understand, and that opportunity kind of goes away. So I think as a developer, the main thing is really understanding like how you can tap into POL. And maybe to put it really simply, the most simple method is this idea of bootstrapping your liquidity. So if you're a project, a protocol, an app, and you have a token, or you will have a token, you have this problem of how do I get liquidity? And maybe Austin, I can pause and you can maybe explain to listeners, maybe historically how like liquidity bootstrapping has been done, just to kind of paint the picture of like how it can be challenging and costly.
Well, it's what I already talked about. It's basically like you drip a second token to someone based on having liquidity locked up because the fees aren't enough that are generated just on the swaps. You have to have some second layer. And it started as like just a dude hitting a button. And eventually I think there's, other things that came from that. But IDK, if I can explain it much more than a dude sending extra tokens if you have tokens locked up in reserves.
So it's like maybe us three, it's pretty reasonable to think like us three could start a protocol, right? And like we have a token and we need to bootstrap liquidity for it. We basically need to find people who are willing, one, to like buy and hold our token, and then two, like lock that token and some other pair up in a smart contract and like run the risk of impermanent loss and like run the risk of their just capital being locked up in one opportunity versus some like, right, the opportunity cost of it being somewhere else. And so that's kind of the issue. And if you need to find a way to incentivize people to provide liquidity. That's a problem. And the most simplest kind of 101 way that you can tap into POL is to say, okay, I'm going to go through governance and set up a proposal to say, I want you guys to direct BGT emissions to my pool for X, Y, or Z reason, like whatever like kind of governance thing you want. But it's like the core of it is you go through governance, it gets approved. And really it goes through governance kind of for safety and alignment reasons, right? Like you don't want anyone to be able to just like get BGT emissions. Maybe it's a rug, maybe it's like a project that it's not a real project, maybe it's like a project that has rugged before, etc. So it kind of goes through this like governance.
This is the whitelist thing you're talking about. This is like there's a governance process to get on the whitelist. And then if you're on the whitelist, you start earning BGT for holding that reserve.
No, you start earning. The pool starts earning BGT. So anyone that's LPing into that pool can earn BGT from it. So you say, hey, I want to be whitelisted. And you go through the whitelisting process. Now you're listed as a gauge, as a rewards vault. Now, all of a sudden, all of the Berachain ecosystem, it's much more attractive to LP into a pool that's receiving BGT versus a pool that's not receiving BGT, right? Because what Austin said, if you are receiving BGT, now you're getting dripped this third token or this other token that can kind of make up that risk and can make it profitable for you to LP into this pool. And now you as a protocol all of a sudden are able to bootstrap your liquidity without paying. Like you don't have to pay anything. You don't have to pay people you don't have to give away your token. You don't have to do any of these other things. And now you can have your liquidity up and running, really quickly.
And it's important here because you don't want people to be able to buy their vote. You don't want BGT to be on a liquid market because someone could just buy up a bunch of BGT and vote for their shitcoin to get whitelisted. And that's why you have this whole process of the only way to get BGT is to earn it. And if you want to get value, if you want to get money out of it, you have to basically switch it to Bear or eject it into Bera, and then the Bera has a liquid market, right?
Exactly.
So that BGT is very important that it stays kind of only earned and not available for purchase, because then you get the whitelist. Yep. Okay. Neat. And you said honey, I missed that, but that must be you lock up Bera and it keeps the honey stable. Just to make sure I know that one too. How does the honey stay stable? Sorry to derail the conversation.
It's okay. So honey is the stable coin that aims to be close to the like $1 US peg.
Okay.
How that like peg or like that, how that happens, actually, I don't actually know. So I
bet it's over collateralized Bera. That's what I would guess.
Okay. I can find out, and maybe we can put in the show notes like what I find out.
Yeah. Okay. So back to the DevRel stuff. So knowing how this whole thing works, knowing that it's mostly EVM compatible, you could use a lot of like DevRel from typical Ethereum stuff, but do you, and how does that work? What does DevRel for Berachain look like? Or Dev Evangelism? You called it something else, and I'm not sure if it's the same thing.
Yeah, so technically my title is Evangelism at Berachain, and I was just kind of talking to someone about this. I think it's more like when you have a team that is more mature, you have the ability to be more like specific when you're giving out roles. Versus if you're hiring your first DevRel, you're like, I just need a DevRel, like just do everything, like write the docs and do talks and do this and do the solutions. But once you have like a bigger team, you're able to say, okay, you're a solutions engineer and like you're this and you're that. So luckily we have a really great team of DevRels at Bearchain when I had already joined. And so my kind of title reflects the specialization around evangelism, which I think falls into education and marketing. And so what does DevRel look like, or Dev Evangelism in this look like in Berachain. Like I said, I think a lot of it is really, really focused, at least in the early days while we're on testnet, on education and like getting people to understand what POL is. Because I think after this conversation, you know, hopefully you guys kind of understand what POL is. It's not something that's like super, super hard or like technical or where you need a white paper to understand it. It's just that a matter of like sitting down and reading, or, you know, having someone explain it to you, because it is kind of a new dimension to think about that you don't really ever think about on other ecosystems. So a lot of my work has been like writing a lot of content, working with ecosystem partners to help them publish content so that other applications, other protocols, other validators can understand kind of that point of view. And really just helping developers think about where it makes sense for them to deploy in 2024, where it's like in a world where technology has converged, basically, like all L1s are pretty much the same, all L2s are pretty much the same. You know, it's not like you go to one chain, it's like you're getting like 10x faster, or it's, you know, something that's like really significant on the tech side. It's all about distribution and liquidity, I think. Like how easily you're able to get users, how much the chain is able to help you like bootstrap to reach escape velocity. So that's kind of what my work looks like nowadays.
I'm definitely learning a lot about POL now. So I have a question. Basically, as an Ethereum developer, since it's EVM compatible, I can just come in and use the same tools. Like I don't need to do anything different. But from what I understand, the use cases will probably be different because of, you know, you can leverage like POL and you can build like different use cases with that. And you mentioned there's like the DEX. I didn't recall the name, but there's also already a DEX, a lending protocol, etc. I think it's, so you recently like had a V2 testnet, or like, can you talk about like what stage the development is?
Yeah, so maybe like 2-3 weeks ago, we dropped V2 testnet. V1 testnet came out, I believe, in March. No, when did V1 come out? No, March is when I joined. I think it came out in like a couple months before I joined. So they were in V1 testnet for a couple months. V2 testnet just came out. I think, so maybe one thing to know about Bearchain is we have these like concept of native dApps. So dApps that are like native to the chain, which is the Bex, Burps, and Bend, which is why they all start with a B. It's like the same name as they would be on others, but just with a B. When I joined, I was like, what the fuck is Burps? What is Bend? That lend with a B. So we have these that are kind of built into the network, and the idea is for this to like really help kick off the activity and kind of come on day one and have these things live. But we have a ton of other teams that are also building DEXs, that are building funding protocols, that are building perps. Maybe with slight tweaks, like we have a team that's building a concentrated liquidity DEX. We have teams that are building like the exponents team that's doing like really cool stuff in kind of that land that's different from what we have on the native dApps. But yeah, I would say like in terms of the development time, I think right now the team is really taking time to like get all the feedback and kind of address issues that we're seeing in V2. You know, we have a bug report that you can fill out if you find something. And, you know, us every day, we're like doing testing ourselves and kind of figuring out where things are. And I think developers and users right now, it's a really good time to like experiment with POL, because I think once it's mainnet, it's a lot scarier to like try something new when you have real money on the line. Whereas right now on testnet, you can go to the faucet, get some Bera, and just like play around with it. And what I love about Berachain is like, it's so, the UI of everything is so playful and so fun. It kind of feels like you're playing a game, especially on testnet. It's like you're just pressing buttons and like clicking things, and you're like, oh, okay, like this LP token's in my wallet now. Oh, and then I like press this like bright orange like button with like an animation. Okay, that's cool. And so I think it's a really good time for people to just like experiment and mess up and like have questions and be confused, so that when mainnet comes along, you're like, you know, it's not even that it's hard. It's just, you know, even coming from our background, like even the concept, for example, of like you stake an LP token. Now for me, that's like automatic. I'm like, okay, you get an LP token, you stake it somewhere like to get rewards. It's like an automatic thing in DeFi. But before, like I had no idea that was a thing that I should just have as an instinct. Now I have that instinct. So I think it's a good way to kind of train like what your instinct should be like for using these types of protocols. So when things go live, you have a really clear idea of what to do.
Awesome. Yeah. And one of my questions is, does scaffold ETH work? Because I love scaffold ETH so much, but I guess it probably just works. It's probably just an EVM compatible RPC. And I just pointed at your testnet RPC. So maybe a better question would be, when does mainnet go live?
When?
Yeah.
So the answer to the one soon.
Soon. Yep. Yep. Is it months? Is it years? Is it days? Is it
It's
probably
dead.
months?
It's like probably like 100 years from now.
Whoa, that's a lot.
I'm just kidding. I really can't say, but
Okay. Soon. Okay, so what about, here's another stupid question. Coming from an Ethereum world, and I see all these L2s that are popping up, why not make Berachain an L2 on Ethereum? Why make it its own L1?
So a few people have asked this, and I've actually heard Smokey answer this, our COO. So I'll just give the answer that he's given. I think the answer that he's given a lot is like the flexibility that you get from having an L1 to do kind of these like new things with consensus and new things with tokenomics are things that you aren't really able to do on an L2.
Interesting.
So I can jump in, and I kind of want to ask like how to follow the developments, and basically like kind of want to see like where people can get involved, right? Like, are there like any open source incentives or open source projects or like incentives, like, I don't know, grants program or like events where can like people join in?
Yeah, I think a great place to get involved is like the Discord is a great first step. Like it's really active and there's tons of people always hanging out there, and they're really helpful for new people coming in and asking questions. And then on the in-person side, we host events kind of at all the big conferences. We were at Consensus and we were at Dubai, and we'll be at ECC, we'll be at DevCon. So I think if you're going to be at any of the major conferences, definitely look out for these events. You can probably, the best way is maybe to follow Berachain on Twitter, and that's where everything gets posted. And as a developer, we actually just spun up a new Twitter handle called Berachain Devs, where we plan to post a lot more developer-focused content. That's also a really good place. And then on the open source side, I think people who are looking to contribute, a great first place to look would be Beacon Kit. I think there's like, our engineering team is really amazing, and they really are pushing to make this something that gets a lot of contributions from the community and not just something that's like maintained by Bearchain. So I think that's also a really good place to look.
And then, so if you are a developer and you do have a lot of EVM tools and you're thinking about building on Berachain, you look over there and you see, oh, they've got Uniswap v2, they've got lending, they've got stablecoin. You said concentrated liquidity. So like, maybe build v3 of Uniswap in. And then let's say you have an idea or something that's like over on L1, L2 Ethereum, and you want to build it on Berachain. I'm assuming you guys are incentivizing those builds somehow, or somehow like, things like concentrated liquidity needs to exist. How are you guys going about incentivizing that, or like grant funding these apps that need to be built that you guys aren't building?
So I think, Berachain's philosophy is actually like pretty anti-grant,
Okay.
just in the sense of like, I think we've seen grants just haven't had the best outcomes. So I think Bearchain's stance is like, we want long-term sustainable support, and not these like grants that will run out and then it's like, oh, I can't do any more work until I get more money. It's just not the approach that they're taking. And we've joked that POL is like an on-chain grants mechanism that actually captures value from grantees. So we do see a lot of teams on Bearchain that have raised funds and that are like, raised seed rounds, raised Series A rounds. So we don't have like a grants program in the traditional sense. We do have something called Build-A-Bera, which is an incubator that is, hosted like by an entity like adjacent to Berachain, but it's like for incubating projects on Berachain, which they get help with raising funds, they get help with like go-to-market and product design, and there's kind of support on that front. But I would say if you're a developer and you're like, I need a way to like make money before I can work on this, or to secure some funds, unfortunately, there's not really like a path for that type of profile.
I'm curious to hear what you think about like sponsoring hackathons and like the projects that come out of there. Is that something Berachain is interested in, or like more personally, like what you think since you've been doing this for a long time now?
Yeah, I think hackathons are tricky. I think it really just depends on like the stage of your project and the state of your tech and your tooling. I think for something that's EVM and for something that's like actually usable, I think it's totally worth it when you're targeting like a specific thing, right? If you're like, I want to get feedback on my testnet v2, like for Bearchain. Like I know it works. I know it's EVM compatible. I know developers are going to have an easy time doing this, and I know I'll be able to get a lot of feedback. It's worth it. I think maybe for some other type of stuff, when it's just like too niche or too big brain, I think it's just like not really worth for, just because hackathons are so expensive nowadays. It's like 30, 40, 50 grand just to be in a hackathon, where if your stuff is too niche, like maybe you'll get 5 submissions and like maybe 2 of them will be like worth your time. Where it's like you could have taken 50 grand and done like a much cooler like accelerator program or like a more focused incubation thing, and like had like 10 teams and, you know, just like had better outcomes. Yeah, I think Berachain hasn't done a lot of hackathons up until this point, just because we haven't had our testnet out. But now that our testnet's out, and as we kind of move forward towards mainnet, I definitely would love to see us do hackathons.
I think that's a good way to put it. Because yeah, you could go to a hackathon, but without like, if you don't have like specific goals to get out of it, it could be like, it might not work out, which we see a lot with different projects. But yeah, this was really cool. Like I learned a lot about like Bearchain and like what proof of liquidity even is. I think it's been around like on Twitter. I've been reading it a lot, but I had like very high level understanding of how it works. So just to kind of put it all together, basically as an Ethereum developer, I can just use all my same tools. I can come on Berachain. It's completely EVM compatible. And what I do need to do is I need to research the proof of liquidity, because that will enable me to build like different new applications or protocols, which weren't possible with Ethereum before.
Yeah, that's right.
Super. Do we? So I think we are like around the end. Is there anything which we didn't ask but you kind of want to mention, or any closing remarks? Just want to pass it on to you for one last time.
Yeah, maybe if listeners want to learn more, they're like, okay, POL sounds cool. Where can I learn more? The best places are the Berachain docs. We have a whole section on POL. The next best place is the Berachain blog. We have a bunch of material, and we're posting like every week at this point, new things. We also have the Berachain developers Twitter handle, Berachain devs, and the main handle of Berachain is just Berachain. And so those are all really great places. We're really working hard to like put out as much content and education as we can, so that someone doesn't have to like read a white paper to understand this, but they can just be like, oh, I read all the blog posts and I read the docs, and like, I totally get this now.
That's cool. I remember, now that you also mentioned, I remember your tweet threads about like also like stuff happening in the Berachain ecosystem. So that's a good place to follow. And we'll for sure like link all the links you mentioned down in the show notes. I can say that now. But yeah, this was really fun. Thanks for coming on and chatting with us, Cami.
Yay! Thanks for having me, you guys.
Good to see you. Thank you. Take care of that horse up here.